My mother-in-law insisted on a DNA test for my baby because he is darker skinned, but I dug up her shady past and ruined her marriage. I need to vent about something that's been consuming me. My mother-in-law has always been a bit controlling, but this time she crossed the line. My husband and I recently had a baby. We've been together for 6 years, married for 3. We've always had a strong and loving relationship, and our little blessing, our daughter, was a dream come true. We were overjoyed when she was born, and I never expected anything to cloud this happiness. Then my mother-in-law stepped in. I was still groggy from medication and the trauma of childbirth, and my husband was swaddling the baby to put her to sleep when my mother-in-law entered the hospital room. The first thing I heard from her was, "Whose baby are you holding?" Her question left me perplexed. My husband said it was our baby he was holding. She said, "Then why is she black?" My husband and I were as shocked as I was. My husband looked at me. We weren't sure why this question popped into her head. I replied that the dark skin color is in my family, so maybe our daughter inherited genes from my maternal side. But she ignored me, saying, "What nonsense." She refused to understand genetics. She was determined to assert that if my husband and I have brown skin, how could our daughter be black? My mother-in-law has always been a difficult person. She's the type who wants everything done her way and doesn't hesitate to criticize when things don't meet her standards. Over the years, I've learned to deal with her behavior, but this time she went too far. I was furious about her comments. How could she imply that I had been unfaithful to my husband? I was already in too much pain and anxiety to bear her toxicity. I asked her if she meant that I was cheating on my husband. She said, "I didn't spell it out, I'm just listing the facts, but if you want to confess, go ahead." I stared at my husband, and he led her away, saying we should discuss this later. It was time for the mom and baby to rest. He returned to my bed and assured me not to be bothered by my mother-in-law's unpleasant comments. I let it go because we weren't that close to my in-laws. She visited again the next day. Casually, the duty doctor was in the room for a checkup. As he was leaving, my mother-in-law asked if there was any chance the baby had been switched, because she was black while we were brown. I was stunned by her behavior. The doctor laughed and said this was the same baby that had been taken out of me, and also that it was too early to determine the baby's skin color. It takes 4 to 6 months for the skin color to settle. She left the room along with the doctor and didn't see me or the baby again. She lives far from us, which is a great relief, but every time we meet at social gatherings, she makes sure to poison them with sarcastic comments about my baby's skin color. When my baby was about 3 months old, we received an invitation to my brother-in-law's son's birthday. It was the first event for our daughter. We were super excited to take her to meet extended family members. She took it as an opportunity to publicly humiliate me. She allied with some toxic relatives and spoke ill of my baby and me. One of them commented, "Brown and brown should be brown or shades of brown, not black." It seems someone mixed black with brown. I was furious. They made this comment in front of everyone to embarrass me. I interrupted, "Excuse me, what do you mean?" My mother-in-law said, "Nothing, we were talking about colors, what did you understand?" They looked at each other and burst into laughter, making me feel uncomfortable. I left the event immediately. A couple of similar incidents followed. The only reason I let this go then was that I was busy raising my newborn. Being a first-time mom, everything was too overwhelming for me. But now, I guess it's time to act. The last straw was a week ago. My baby turned 6 months old. Some of our friends came to celebrate this milestone with us. Suddenly, my mother-in-law showed up. I didn't want a confrontation in front of my friends, so I said nothing and welcomed her into the house. She entered and said, "The skin should have settled by 6 months, let me see what you got." Everyone was stunned by her comment. One of my friends was holding the baby. She passed her to my mother-in-law. She looked at my baby and exclaimed, "Oh, still black," and handed the baby back to my friend. I stood there in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened or what I should say to save face. I decided to hit back since she had already started the show. My husband was in the kitchen, so I called his name and asked him to come out. He rushed out, and I told him that his mother needed biology lessons because she clearly didn't understand genetics or maybe didn't even go to school because only an illiterate person could talk such nonsense. My mother-in-law looked at my husband and whispered, "I didn't want to bring this up in front of everyone, she called for it." I interrupted and told my husband about her sarcastic comments. She made a puppy face and said no one would have understood because it was too subtle. She said, "Now that you have brought it up in front of everyone, let me be clear. I demand a DNA test for the baby, or else she won't get the family name." I yelled at her to leave. My husband made it clear that he trusts me and that there's no way we would do a DNA test on the baby, even if his parents disinherit the baby. We don't care. The thing is, although my husband trusts and supports me, and I know I have never been unfaithful, I want to do the DNA test and throw the report in my mother-in-law's face. But part of me is holding back, thinking I shouldn't give in to my mother-in-law's demands and feed her ego. What do you think is the best way to put my mother-in-law in her place? Update 1. Thanks everyone for the suggestions. Getting some fresh perspectives helped to some extent. I had the option to avoid the test and cut my mother-in-law out of our lives. We had already done that, but she wasn't going to shut her mouth. She was still going around talking nonsense about me and my baby. The best way to deal with this was to do the test and throw it in her face. I texted her from my husband's phone, saying we were doing a paternity test on the baby. She replied, "Great, you finally trusted my instincts. I'm sure it's right as it has always been. Let me know when the reports come out." We did the test, and as expected, it resulted in a 99.99% match with my husband. My husband called her and informed her that the report was ready and she should come see it for herself. She came, but not alone. She was with her sisters who are just as evil as she is. They entered the house, hugged my husband and said, "I'm sorry, my boy. I know it hurt, but it was important for the truth to come out." My husband broke free and handed the envelope to my mother-in-law. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law's sisters shot me strange looks as if to say, "Oh, you're still here?" My mother-in-law opened the report and read it. She stared at it for a good 5 minutes. I took the report from her hands and asked if she needed help understanding it, because it might be difficult for a 6th grader to comprehend the information. She said, "Wow, look at your confidence. You faked it, didn't you?" My husband cut her off and said we were done with her and no longer wanted her in our lives. She tried to manipulate my husband, but he asked her to leave and told her we were cutting her off. She cried and stormed out of the house, her sisters following with bitter expressions. But that wasn't all. I started an email to all extended family members and close relatives, whom my mother-in-law had poisoned regarding the paternity test of my daughter, and sent them the DNA report. I described how my mother-in-law had been torturing me and accusing me of infidelity during my crucial postpartum period. Most of them responded with apologies and support. Since then, my mother-in-law has kept a low profile and hasn't reappeared in our lives. My father-in-law also called and apologized for not keeping my mother-in-law in check, admitting he had failed to keep the family together. He asked if he could still be a part of my baby's life. I told him I had an issue with him for not defending me and allowing her to slander me, but I understood he didn't want to ruin the peace in his home, so it was fine. I made it clear he could see my baby only in my house, and under no circumstances would I share space with her grandmother. He didn't say anything, but a few days later, he showed up at my house with flowers and baby essentials to make up for the inconvenience caused. Some people need to be put in their place. My mother-in-law deserved it, and she brought it upon herself. Update 2. Well, who knew there was much more to come? It seems my mother-in-law was projecting her own insecurities onto me. After that email, many relatives from my father-in-law's side reached out to offer their support. They said they knew about my mother-in-law's wickedness, as she had always been a narcissistic woman. Some hinted she had a wild streak in her younger days, but no one said anything concrete. It was my father-in-law's sister who spilled the tea. She mentioned Richard, a man I had never heard of before. I couldn't shake the feeling there was more to the story, so I decided to dig a little deeper into her past, something I had never considered doing before. I wasn't prepared for what I found. I tried probing other relatives from my father-in-law's side, and more people mentioned him. According to them, Richard and my mother-in-law were very close, and there were rumors about their relationship, but nothing was confirmed. They were seen together at restaurants and malls, but she manipulated my father-in-law, who remained in denial. I was still processing the information and contemplating what to do about it when there was another encounter with my mother-in-law. We attended the funeral of one of my husband's distant relatives. Upon seeing me, she made a loud comment, "Well, if you have legs to open, you can fake any report. These men in the labs can manipulate any test report for a cheap thrill, so I don't trust these reports." She didn't explicitly mention my daughter's paternity test, but it was evident she was bad-mouthing me, insinuating I had slept with a lab technician to manipulate the DNA report. I am so fed up with this woman. She doesn't care about being cut off from the baby's life. She continues to be her narcissistic self and clings to her accusations. I don't know how much truth there is to those rumors about my mother-in-law's wild streak, but it would be like winning the lottery if I could uncover dirt from her past. The problem is that the rumor dates back 30 years. I don't know how to investigate that past. I would appreciate any suggestions you might have. I really need to do something about this toxic woman. Update 3. Well, thanks for the advice. I received some really good ones. Hiring a private detective was one of the options I was considering. In fact, I was in touch with one of the agencies when something else came up in the meantime. My father-in-law came to invite us to his retirement party. I declined the invitation because I didn't want to share space with my mother-in-law. He assured me my mother-in-law felt guilty for her behavior and wanted to work on the relationship with me. He insisted I forgive her and that we reunite as a family. I told him what happened at the funeral the other day. He asked if there was anything he could do to change my mind. I told him I would consider forgiving my mother-in-law if he did a paternity test on his children. My husband and father-in-law were confused by my demand. My father-in-law said he was sure both kids were his. I told him my husband and I knew our baby was ours, yet we did the test to satisfy his wife's ego, so he had to do the test to level the field and wanted to see his family united. Otherwise, we were happy being alone. My husband tried to probe into my reasoning, but I made it clear that my demand was non-negotiable. My father-in-law said, "Well, if that's what you really want, we can do it for you. There's nothing to lose, right?" I replied, "Well, I suppose so, time will tell." My father-in-law and my husband gave their samples the same day. I asked him to test my sister-in-law too. They called her, but she refused to give her sample, saying she was out of this nonsense. I didn't keep my hopes high because the probability was very low. What if my husband was the legitimate child and my sister-in-law wasn't? Or what if my mother-in-law had an affair but never had a baby with her lover? However, I was determined to humiliate my mother-in-law one way or another. If this DNA test turned out in her favor, I would have planned something else for her. My suspicion became partially true even before the reports came out. When my father-in-law returned home and told her about the paternity matter, she went berserk. She yelled at him for doing the test without her consent and insisted he cancel it. Her reason was she didn't want to feed my ego, but this time she couldn't manipulate my father-in-law, and he sensed something fishy. He said he wouldn't cancel it and now awaited the report. My mother-in-law called my husband and tried to manipulate him emotionally, saying, "Don't you trust your mother?" My husband replied, "Yes, I trust you. And I also trust my wife, however, we did the test only to satisfy your ego. Let's consider it a formality." She said it was feeding my ego and should be canceled. My husband said, "What's the point of canceling? We've already paid for it and given the sample. Let's see the report and finish this." Seeing her desperation, I understood I had hit a nerve. To divert everyone's attention, she acted sick, claiming she slipped in the shower and fractured her back and knees. Unfortunately, that backfired on her, and she was bedridden. I went to see her and said, "It's sad that you're confined to bed, otherwise, you could also open your legs and manipulate the reports." She insulted me, and I laughed in her face. I knew what was coming. I don't know why she didn't confess and let my father-in-law find out through the report. As expected, there was a 0.9% kinship between my father-in-law and my husband, which meant he was not the father. I knew when the report would be released and was following it through the serial number. The day it was supposed to come out, I went to my mother-in-law's house to witness the drama in person. When I arrived, I handed the report to my father-in-law, who became furious. He threw it in my mother-in-law's face. She pretended not to understand what it said. I picked it up and said, "It means my father-in-law is not your son's father. I'm not sure about the daughter, though." I laughed inwardly. If karma really exists, this is how it should work. My mother-in-law acted as if she fainted from pain. I called my husband and told him his mother had fainted, so he should come home from work immediately. He arrived and saw the report for himself. My father-in-law forced my mother-in-law to confess, but she kept denying it, saying she didn't know how the result came out that way. She even blamed me for manipulating the report to get back at her. I said, "If you don't trust this hospital, you can have it tested in a couple more places to rule out the possibility of error or manipulation." She didn't want to do it, nor did she accept the report. After much back and forth, my father-in-law shouted, "What is it?" There was a deathly silence in the room. My mother-in-law broke into tears and said she would confess everything but wanted me to leave. I took my bag and stood up, but my father-in-law said, "She's not going anywhere. You humiliated her in front of the world, now she will stay right there." She started crying and confessed that she had been cheating with the neighbor Richard when my father-in-law was deployed. She said she was lonely. My husband and father-in-law looked at her with horrified expressions. My husband stormed out, and I followed him. He drove off without me. I returned home. My mission was accomplished. I waited for my husband until 10 at night before calling him. He rejected the call and I gave him space. I fell asleep while putting my baby to bed. I don't know when he came home. I hugged him while sleeping. He whispered, "You knew, didn't you?" I nodded and hugged him tightly. The next morning my husband had a fever and called in sick. He refused to get out of bed, saying he was having an existential crisis. I made an appointment for his therapy. I hope it helps him accept his reality. Meanwhile, my father-in-law went to see my sister-in-law and showed her the report. She was furious. She also got tested, but it came out 99%, so she is my father-in-law's daughter, but my husband is Richard's. The thing is, no one knows where Richard is, not even my mother-in-law. She didn't even tell him my husband was his son, because he was a careless man. He could have caused chaos in my mother-in-law's perfect family, so she quietly pushed him out of her life. At this point, I'm not sure if my husband even wants to reconcile with his biological dad. However, my father-in-law came to our house a couple of days ago and broke down. He said he didn't know how to have this conversation. I stood up to give them space to talk as father and son, but he insisted I stay. To ease the discomfort, I suggested, maybe we could continue as we are, respecting and loving each other as human beings, if we don't want to give it a relationship label. My father-in-law said he went to couples therapy with my mother-in-law, and there she confessed she projected her insecurities onto me since my daughter had dark skin. She thought I had cheated on my husband like she had. Fortunately, her cheating didn't come to light because my husband inherited all my mother-in-law's traits and not Richard's. I don't know how the relationship between my father-in-law, mother-in-law, and husband will shape up from this point, but I feel satisfied to have uncovered the truth behind my mother-in-law's mask. My father-in-law entrusted this trauma to his sister, the same one who gave me the hint about my mother-in-law's affair with Richard. She called me yesterday and applauded me for going the extra mile to uncover this truth. She said I had brought down my mother-in-law for both of us because my mother-in-law had always been cruel to her. It's only a matter of time before the whole family and relatives know the truth about her. When my mother-in-law was confessing, I felt bad for her, but when I saw the bigger picture, I think she brought it upon herself. She could have stayed silent as she had for years instead of messing with me over my baby's skin color. She dug her own grave, and now she has to lie in it. Update 4. Well, we are facing a divorce, which is between my father-in-law and mother-in-law. For now, my husband wants to keep his father in his life, and we will also have him around our daughter. He has considered him his father all this time, and sees no reason to change that now. Nor does my husband want to contact Richard, as he sees no point in it now, after so many years. We don't even know if he's alive or not. My mother-in-law, of course, is devastated because she never expected things to escalate this way. But she brought it upon herself, and she had many moments to stop this and leave her nonsense, but she insisted until she brought out my vengeful side. She had to insist a lot, because I had just become a mother and had no interest in all this drama. But she pressed the right buttons to explode this truth in her face. Seeing her error was not enough for her, and that's why she needs to make me the culprit of her failed marriage. Sure, opening her legs for the neighbor while her husband fought for the country wasn't the problem, I was. In her twisted mind, which I doubt has much gray matter, she still sees me as the villain, but no one else sees it that way. Even the family has distanced themselves from her. Even my husband and my sister-in-law are not speaking to her, but as you know, when an animal is cornered, it becomes more dangerous. So, my mother-in-law tried something as a last resort. A week ago, I started noticing fake accounts on social media leaving negative and offensive comments on my posts. At first, I thought it might be a coincidence, but then I began receiving private messages full of insults and baseless accusations about my character and my relationship with my husband. These messages mentioned personal details that only someone close to the family could know. Then one night, I received a message from an anonymous profile saying, "Soon, everyone will know the truth about you. You are nothing but an imposter and a manipulator. Your time will come." I realized this was not just a random troll attack. There was something more behind it. I decided to investigate and noticed that several of the profiles attacking me were following the same accounts of friends and family. The most surprising thing was that one of these anonymous profiles was being followed by my mother-in-law. With this new suspicion, I confronted my mother-in-law directly. I called her and asked if she knew anything about these attacks. Of course, she denied everything, claiming she had no idea what I was talking about, and that someone must be trying to sow discord between us. But I knew, and my husband knew, that she had been creating fake profiles, thinking no one would catch her. With this evidence in hand, I organized a family meeting and presented all the information. My mother-in-law tried once again to deny everything, but this time the evidence was undeniable. My husband, furious and hurt, told his mother that she had gone too far, and that from that moment on, she was completely out of our lives. He warned her that if she continued to interfere, we would seek a restraining order. Since then, no one speaks to her, and my father-in-law has left the house until the divorce and the sale of the house are settled with her. This woman seems unable to put an end to her nonsense, as she is still trying to attack me. I don't know what she expects from all this, because attacking me won't change the fact of her infidelity. My husband thinks she might be developing dementia or something similar, because, before this episode, she didn't exhibit such behaviors, at least not to this extent. She probably needs attention, but now no one in the family wants to deal with her. I don't know if there is anyone from her side of the family who wants to help her, but that is no longer my problem. Update 5. Well, my husband's theory that she might have dementia is becoming more accurate, based on what happened a few days ago. She came to our house, but she wasn't in the best shape, dressed in dirty clothes and not presentable for going out. She knocked on the door and was shouting things like, "You have a black lover, don't lie to me." We called the police, and they came. After a preliminary assessment, they decided it was best to take her to a facility for her care, because she was clearly not in her right mind. Even when the police arrived, she continued to spout incoherent things. She even said that the father of my daughter was Richard. I don't know if it was because Richard is a man of color or if her thoughts were just jumbled. I won't deny that I felt some pity seeing her like that, even though I am still affected by the things she said before. At least now she will receive treatment and will be away from me for a while. Editing to add, feeling pity does not mean I forgive her or anything like that. It doesn't change anything about the past, with or without illness.